like to start by thanking Mrs. Maha Shire and the Parents Committee of Osprey Root for organizing this session. And I presume most of you are parents. We invited the Parents Committee from ACS to come as well. Are they here?
No, they have their own.
We have some D&B people here, which is great to see. So we're ready to go. As you know, this has been a very interesting time at the school. And we're learning a lot as this infectious disease progresses. There's more and more information coming out, and so I'm really looking forward to today's session as well, because as a school we're trying to stay on top of things and make sure we adopt the best practices for keeping our children healthy and still attending school. If I were to go back to graduate school again, I would teach a course called School Administration and Infectious Disease. Because I happen to be the president of the International School of Beijing. I had the great luck of getting there right at the same time as SARS. I really had full black curly hair until April 2003. That was quite a ride. But based on that experience and knowing the concern that everyone has about having school during a time when an epidemic, or in this case a pandemic, is going on, I think we put a lot of steps in place at IC very early. We tried to communicate with the parents and with the students, and our Bible, which we started using actually back in August, is from the CDC, Preparing for the Flu. It's on our website, but I also read a few copies off. It's excellent guidelines for schools, if someone would like to take some of those. I had the great pleasure of meeting Dr. Khan Sharara several weeks ago, actually this last month, in the emergency room at AUH, because my wife had swine flu, and she diagnosed it and got the blood test confirmed. I never got it, thank goodness, and we didn't know until after she had recovered that she'd actually had it. So it's these tricky days. But with no further ado, please welcome Dr. Khan Sharara.
Good morning. Thank you, President. And I'd like to start by thanking Mrs. Shah for inviting me to give this presentation and the Parent Committee of RASBU. As you know, this has been a very busy time for us infectious diseases physicians in Lebanon, but all over the world. I was telling Mr. Johnson that we seem to have had a lot of problems in the past 10 years. You know, the anthrax, and then the SARS, and then the bird flu, and now comes the swine flu. What I'm going to try to do is spend around 40 minutes going over what is swine flu, what is H1N1 influenza, how do we get it, how can we prevent it, etc. And then I'll leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. I'm sure you have many questions you'd like to ask. But just to keep the flow going, if you allow me to finish the presentation, and then I'll be very happy to answer any questions. What I try to do, first I'm going to start by saying I'm not very much used to present to a non-medical audience. Usually all my presentations are to medical doctors, and it's an easy job for me. So presenting to a non-medical audience is a bit more tricky because you like to simplify the information that a non-medical person can assimilate and not get bored by the details. So this is what I try to do, and I'm going to go very slowly. And again, what I did is presenting it in terms of questions. What are some of the questions that come to your mind, and try to present some of the answers. So influenza H1N1 pandemic. First, I think for influenza, it's important to know that the virus is transmitted through airborne by either coughing, sneezing, or talking. So we breathe in that virus. So if you see in this picture, the virus comes through the nose, and then it comes down, and then it plays in the mucous membrane. And it is very well known that for any influenza epidemic, the school children are the key disseminators of the virus. And then the school children bring the virus home, and then from home to the grandma, to the grandfather, to the mom, etc. And this is how the virus spread in the community. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is pandemic and what is epidemic? It's a bit confusing, and I think here I put the definitions. An epidemic is when the cases of a disease exceed what is normally expected. So if you have an infection like a urinary tract infection where you have 2-3 cases in a certain community, that's just normal, it's not an epidemic. But if you have typhoid fever, for example, in 10 cases in a school at the same time, that is higher than what is expected, and then therefore you say, I have an epidemic of this infection. A pandemic is an epidemic that occurs over a large geographic area and pretty much spreads to all over the world. And so this is why H1N1 was called a pandemic, because it started in one place and then spread all over. So I'm going to start with a few slides about swine influenza virus. Before I do that, I'd like to remind you that we've had past influenza pandemics. I put here the 3 very big pandemics that have happened in the past. In 1918, there was the Spanish flu pandemic, and then in 1957, the Asian flu, and 68, the Hong Kong flu. Now, of the 3 pandemics, the one that has gained a lot of interest is the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, which really affected a lot of people, millions of people, and the virus was very aggressive then and led to the death of many people. And further studies of the Spanish flu virus showed that the virus was an H1N1 swine influenza virus. Now, the swine influenza virus is a highly contagious respiratory disease, and why do we call it swine influenza virus? Because it is transmitted from pigs. Usually the transmission to humans is via contact with infected pigs. So if you see in the picture here, if you have a close contact of a pig with a human, and if the pig has the virus, obviously he can transmit the virus to the human, as we see in the picture. But this is not a common occurrence. Now, if that child acquired the virus from this pig, then that child can take the virus home, and then he can infect his mother, and then this is how the virus spread. The H1N1 influenza pandemic of 2009, initially, if you recall, it was called the swine flu pandemic. And then people stopped using the term swine flu pandemic and started using the H1N1 pandemic. And I'll go over why we named it this way. This pandemic brought the international alert to one of its highest over the past, I would say, 30 years. Shut down hundreds of schools, took front pages in the newspapers, and created a lot of panic all over. I should tell you that the swine influenza virus is not very new, affecting the humans. So I mentioned that the 1918 pandemic was thought to be due to a swine flu virus. But also, if we go back to more recent years, over the past 30 years or so, 1976, there was an outbreak of swine influenza virus in New Jersey, and 200 people were affected, only 1 person died. And as you see what's listed on the slides, since there have been cases of swine influenza viruses, cases have been reported not only in the United States, but Czechoslovakia, Netherlands, Russia, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. So there have been swine influenza viruses infections in many countries, but luckily back then the virus was confined and did not spread like the one currently. More recently, between 2005 and 2009, there were 12 human cases of swine influenza virus confirmed, but none of them were fatal. So if we come back now to the current H1N1 influenza outbreak, March